Good morning, coronavirus ladies and germs. This is your ticker guy for the 23rd. The evidence is not only overwhelming now, it was originally. And yet now, all of a sudden, we have a few people speaking up. Just a few. Let me cite to you something that was sent to me by email. I'm not going to name the person who sent it. But suffice it, it is sufficient to say that this person is a actual MD, a real one. And in addition to that, a rather well-known one, too. And he's noted that 25% of the deaths last week in New York were out of nursing homes, 41% in Massachusetts, and now in New Jersey, there's a report out that 40% of the total deaths were out of nursing homes. Now, approximately the same amount, by the way, were out of New York's population. As I pointed out a long time ago, the overrepresentation that we were seeing in nursing home residents was about 50 times their percentage of the population as a whole. Not percent, times. And that this ratio was holding true all the way through. And in fact, we knew this was a problem back when we had the issue with Kirkland, that this virus was killing people in that circumstance on a very serious basis. It's extremely virulent in those people, and it was based upon a set of comorbidities, which we all knew about. Yet, rather than take action to mitigate that risk, that specific risk. Remember, we're talking about half of 1% of the American population here, folks. We destroyed the American economy. Okay? I don't care if you think that Hillary would have done a worse job than Trump. It doesn't make any difference. The fact of the matter is that Donald J. Trump directly enabled all of these economy-destroying lockdowns in the United States. He not only enabled it, he appointed two scam artists, Birx and Fauci, to his coronavirus task force, who instead of going where the evidence led them, exactly as the CDC and the NIH did with AIDS, instead embraced this broader principle that all of society had obligations to protect everybody else. In that meant we couldn't offend anyone, especially the people who were actually spreading the disease. We did this with AIDS. We refused to close bathhouses where we knew the disease was being spread because we couldn't offend gay men, and gay men were an important voting bloc. This time we did the same thing with nursing homes and hospitals because we can't offend healthcare workers, even though they are the ones that are spreading the disease. And the nursing homes in particular are one of the central focuses of how this thing is getting around, not just within the nursing home community, but what do you think all the people that work there do after they get done? Yeah. We got another unemployment report. We are now up to approximately 26 million Americans who have been laid off. We now have the secondary effects of the stupidity that came out of Congress, which I remind you again, President Donald J. Trump signed. And that is that you now have people who are extremely angry with their boss because if they got a PPP loan or whatever the hell they're calling it now, Paycheck Protection Program, whatever, then all of a sudden, oops, they have to go back to work, and they were making more money sitting at home getting drunk than they were working. So why would they want to go back to work? Well, they don't want to go back to work. And oh, by the way, those $600 bonuses go through the end of July. So anyone who thinks that the economy is going to immediately come roaring back and all these unemployed people are going to immediately want their jobs back, you have rocks in your head. Not going to happen. Then you have Georgia, which has decided that if you own a tattoo parlor, or a nail salon or a hair salon, you can reopen your economy. The rest of everybody, well, you're just going to have to wait a little while longer. Of course, the left is excoriating him, and even Trump, yesterday in his presser said that he disagreed with what Kemp was doing. Well, why did you disagree? Why? Because it might blow your thesis? You mean because if Georgia reopens businesses and says, well, you can go and do what you want, more or less, then what ends up happening is nothing? That, oops, now all of a sudden it's shown that you just threw 25 million Americans out of work for no purpose whatsoever? Then there's Sweden, which, everybody loves to hate on them because they didn't lock everybody down. But guess what? Their curve's flat. Hey, wait a minute. How'd that happen? Well, they were voluntarily socially distanced, but they left the schools open. Now, they did a really bad job of protecting people in nursing homes, which really sucks. And they also have a problem with third world invaders who they've given sanctuary to. And a lot of those people work in those places. Yeah, when you have a fecal oral spread bug, that could be pretty bad. But, hey, you got to give them credit where credit is due, because guess what? Their rate of horror is not really any worse than ours. Well, wait a minute. They didn't close their economy. So what does that say about the effectiveness of us closing our economy? It says that we shouldn't have closed our economy, right? And there's some people finally noticing this. I could go on and on and on with this podcast. I could make this an hour-long See, I Told You so banner waving contest. That's, and at some point maybe I'll do one of those. I'll just do the quick hits and we'll put up headlines, and I'll just, all the way down the line. And I'll go back through some of the old tickers and the old podcasts, and I will point out when I was saying it and what I was saying, which, if you've been following me, you know exactly what my position has been, that we knew that this bug was weird when Diamond Princess happened, that it was inconceivable that two people living in the same cabin, in the same little cruise ship cabin, and I've taken cruises, so I know how big these things are, folks. There are tiny little spaces, okay? One of them gets deathly ill, and the other one doesn't get sick at all. For a bug that has an attack rate of 3 or better, this is an inconceivable reality. All right, we're talking about a respiratory virus here. All right, inconceivable that you could coop somebody up in quarantine with somebody else, and one of them gets it and the other one doesn't get it, unless they either have cross immunity or they got it but they didn't get sick. Then it makes sense. But other than that, nope, doesn't make sense at all. Okay, you quarantine everybody in their room in a cruise ship. How in the hell does it spread between cabins? Well, duh, it's the crew. How is the crew spreading it? What do you think? They're coughing on the food? I don't think so. So how is the crew spreading it? Well, fecal oral, folks, which I've pointed out. It was obvious, okay? We knew this bug expressed in feces very, very early on. In other words, in crap. All right? And, hey, man, if you are not inculcated into Western white man sanitation, then, oh, boy, you got a little problem, okay? Why'd this thing spread so fast and so wildly in Wuhan? Well, squat toilets. We've been over that one too. But now all of a sudden it's becoming fashionable to question the lockdowns. Now all of a sudden it's becoming fashionable to question whether or not this was a wise choice. It was never a wise choice, folks. And this is a question that we knew, and we knew the answers to this early on. We knew the answers to this in February. And you could make an argument, as I said, in the early part of March, the first couple of weeks, you could make a cogent argument that given the data that was coming in at that time with very low case counts and a lot of noise, and so it was, the uncertainty levels were extremely high, but you could make the argument that ordering the 15-day pause as an advisory, what Trump did, 15 days to slow the spread, that actually made some sense on the data, okay? You can make that argument. But once that 15 days had expired, at the point of expiration, we knew factually, not speculatively, factually, that the 15 days was a load of BS. That we were, in fact, any further kind of extension of lockdowns or any sort of things were not only unnecessary, they were harmful, because the rate of transmission had already slowed. And the rate of transmission, folks, slowed prior to the 15 days because you basically top ticked on that day. And yet, you don't go from being infected to showing up in the hospital in an afternoon. This is not influenza, where when you catch it, the next day, you're sick. That's not how it works. You have a several-day latency period. And yet, that several-day latency period meant that the curve actually bent days before any of the lockdown measures were imposed. Any of them. Anywhere in the United States, I don't care where you are, that the curve had already started to decline. And the slope did not accelerate after the lockdowns. Now where are we? We're right around 1.0. Why are we right around 1.0? Because we're on the flat part. Why are we at the flat part? Because the bug has spread to enough people that it's not very efficient anymore. Is there going to be some kind of a spike when you lift these restrictions? Well, I don't know. There might be, there might not be. Probably not. More troubling is that because this is a coronavirus, the immunity is probably not permanent and the virus will mutate. And that means that it will almost certainly come back in the fall. The left crazy media took the CDC's director's quote out of context and ran screaming with it saying, oh my God, it's going to be worse. And then, did you see what they did yesterday? They spent the first 15 minutes shilling for everyone to go get a flu shot. Do you know how many flu shots I've had in my life, ladies and gentlemen? 0. Do you know why I've never had a flu shot? Actually, I'll take that back. I had one. I got one time when I was running my internet company, and and we had health insurance. I went to the docs, well, do you want it? It's it's free. Yeah, all right, whatever. What the hell? I got sicker than a dang dog. I have never had such a miserable experience with the flu as I had that year. Never. Now, I normally, hey, as I said, I had a kind of creepy, crawly kind of bug in January that I thought was COVID-19. It was not. Although we're going to have to play with the antibody tests again because I have suspicions. Let's just say that. We'll just leave it at that. But I'm not going to do anything right now. But my guess is that what you're going to find is that this immunity wanes like it always does, and the virus is going to mutate, and it's going to become essentially pointless. So you're going to go, there's going to be no vaccine, folks, ever. Okay? And for all the screamers that are pointing to that, you're crazy. But now all of a sudden, now on the 23rd of April, 1 month after the crazies did their crazy. Okay, remember the original 15 days to slow the spread was something that we were going to do. It was going to expire at the end of March. Okay, then it was extended for another 30 days. So it's really 45 days, supposedly. Now all of a sudden we have scientists that are coming to the same conclusion that I came to originally, which is that what we did was stupid. We've destroyed the economy. We've thrown America into an economic depression, literally into an economic depression, and we've scared the living bejesus out of everybody in the country. We actually have mayors and others mandating that you wear masks in public. That's insanity. If you want to wear one, that's fine. Do you want to know why it helps? Because it keeps you from touching your face, if worn properly. Okay? Now, will it help you from touching your face completely? No, and you still have your eyes, and your eyes are a major entry point for the virus. But it removes two of the easy things for you to touch with your hands, and that is your mouth and your nose. Okay? And especially if you're one of those people that has the habit of picking your nose or picking at your nose and whatever. Hey, it does stop that. And by the way, if you're a smoker, one of the big problems with being a smoker is that oral fixation. You put your fingers up to your mouth all the time. Okay? And if there's virus on your hands, okay. So, people say, well, why is smoking such a big deal? Oh, by the way, here's the other one that's come out. Now there's all of a sudden, now there's a big debate being had about blood pressure meds and ACE inhibitors, which we also knew head on. Okay. What was I saying in one of my earliest podcasts and one of my earliest tickers on this thing? That if you're taking high blood pressure medication, You need to be very, very careful, and you need to talk to your physician about this and maybe get switched onto something that doesn't have this impact. And yet we have people who work for the pharmaceutical industry who want to do studies on whether or not these meds might actually be protective. Oh, really? They're protective? You guys have forgotten the first rule of correlations, which is that correlation does not prove causation, but lack of correlation is almost always proof positive that the causation is not there. So when you have people that are falling over dead at very high rates, who are hypertensive and taking drugs for it, and diabetic, which, by the way, goes together with obesity, and then you want to try to argue that the hypertension drugs are actually protective. There's actually people in the pharmaceutical industry trying to argue this. What a load of crap. All right. This is the kind of thing that passes for so-called science these days. Oh, by the way, speaking of science, I have to bring up the VA study. Okay. I've read through it now. There are so many stupidities in there. And by the way, this is a study funded by the NIH, Fauci's agency, which appears to have been intentionally designed to try to discredit hydroxychloroquine. The modalities of prescription, the fact that they actually selected for more severely ill people to get the drug, that it appears that they did so at the point at which they already had one foot in the grave, and then they turned around and claimed, well, without Z-Pak, it doesn't work. With Z-Pak, it isn't any worse than taking nothing. Well, wait a minute. And, oh, by the way, the people who they put on that part of the program were sicker. And then there's the other confounding factor, which is it appears that they actually moved people from one arm to the other during the middle of the period, which is, you absolutely cannot count those people. That goes from a badly designed study into intentional scientific fraud. But nobody's going to do it because this was retrospective. So therefore, we didn't design it to be done that way. So they'll just say, well, that's just kind of the way it ended up working out. Yeah, okay. We'll pull the other one, folks. The conflicts of interest that have been popped out of this thing have just been eye-popping. But here's the reality when you get down to it, okay? And we're now hearing, more. I'm not the only one saying it anymore. If you do not have those underlying conditions, your risk of being killed by this thing is infinitesimally small. It's tiny. It's not zero. But the overall case fatality rate is about equal to that of a serious flu, like the one we had in the late 1960s that went through America. Yes, there was a serious flu that went through America in the late 1960s. Not the early pandemic, the Spanish flu. No. This looks more like that. And did we quarantine entire cities and counties and states and shut down the entire economy for that in the 1960s? No, we did not. And yet this bug, when you look at the facts, when you look at the data, that's where we are. And by the way, those people who claim that this thing had a 3 or 4% CFR, case fatality rate, they knew they were lying originally. Every one of them, including Birx, including Fauci, including all the people from the CDC, including the people from the WHO. They either knew or intentionally averted their eyes as early as Diamond Princess. And by the way, that includes, for those of you that like to get on your knees and play with Trump's schnoz, that includes all you Trumpers. You've been had by the person that you love so much. And yeah, you've been had by all the people on the left, too, who forced him to sign a relief bill that made it more profitable to sit at home and get drunk than to actually go out and work. And one last thing I want to leave you with. When this is totaled up, the number of people who we killed with these shutdowns, who couldn't get elective procedures, who deferred chemotherapy, who didn't have aneurysms operated on, who didn't have other procedures and other investigatory medicine because it was not considered essential at the time for a month, and they dropped dead or were permanently debilitated by heart attacks and strokes that could have been avoided and would have been avoided had we not closed down the economy. My guess is that the excess mortality and morbidity from that is going to greatly exceed that from this virus. That's the reality, folks. And all of you screaming Karens, you are personally responsible for every one of those deaths. Personally. I'm your Ticker Guy.